tongue is numb, the Keurig's clean. Your dog is dead, it's a Ponzi screen. Ponzi screen, because it's just something to do.
It's rainy. It's real rainy in Seattle right now.
Yeah.
Boy, oh boy.
Are you feeling sleepless? Or you and Tom Hanks gonna go canoodle later at the Space Needle?
I just like the idea of doing that currently because the city is wildly empty. So I would just love the idea of somebody walking into a diner and just like really disturbing the wait staff by making like all those sounds.
Oh,
like
yeah.
while they're eating the soup.
Okay, I gotta say that I gotta cut you off here. That was When Harry Met Sally.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man. I mean,
Whoops.
God, fucking damn it. All right, well, let's cancel the podcast this week.
You got email. You got mail. Oh, wait, no, the name of it is definitely You Got Mail.
I like the I don't know, like Moldovan knockoff versions, like you have an email.
You got the email. Yes, that's right.
You have received an email.
Yeah. But anyways, it's not just a regular Ponzi Scream this week. We have a lovely guest from the podcast Well, There's Your Problem, which is a podcast about infrastructural disaster. Justin Roczniak. Justin Roczniak is here.
Hey.
Hello, I'm here. I'm here on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for being here. We appreciate it. We'll love to see it. How are you doing? How's Philadelphia?
It is sunny in Philadelphia. Not always, but today it is.
Dude, you guys, man, too many cities with weather prepositional phrases afterwards. Sleepless in Seattle, sunny in Philadelphia, a tired Jew in Brooklyn. That's not a movie, but like, you know.
Yet.
Yet. Not.
Yes. David is Jewish. Just to let everyone know, David is
if anyone
Jewish.
If anyone wants to make the movie.
Yeah. That's a knockoff Moldovan movie. David is Jewish. Yeah. That's just Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Been watching Shit Creek a lot.
Yeah.
David in that show. Justin, thanks for coming on the podcast, man.
No problem. I'm always happy to be on more podcasts. Have me on your podcast.
Yeah, I have to say, just for any of the listeners out there, too, I literally asked because you said that. I can't remember when, but probably somewhere around 8 months ago, I was listening to Well, There's Your Problem, and you were like, please have no airs about having me on your podcast. And I was like, I will have zero airs then. Here we go. Thank you for answering the email. It's the first step.
That's always the hard part, because then you're like, I'll get to this later, and then you forget about it, and then it's 6 months pass. And
I mean, David and I both did stand up for many years, and there's nothing worse than just like, I'm going to take this email and I'm going to pretty much flush it down the toilet to this booker who's never going to answer. They're gonna treat this like the trash it is.
Nothing like looking at your email inbox and seeing the digital version of crickets.
Yeah. Yeah. I always related to Gmail, where on the very bottom, if your internet connection was just like a little shaky, it would just say something's not right, and I'd be like, man, you know it, Gmail. You know what's going on. Yeah. So anyway, today we're going to be kind of like mixing, or I'm going to try to mix the two aspects of the podcast, with our guest, and attempt it in the most seamless way. And we're going to talk about something and someone who is very fraudy, very white-collary kind of, I guess if you wanted to put him on that.
He's nasty.
He's nasty. He's a nasty guy. He's not a good guy. We're going to be talking about Robert Moses partially, and also what happened at East Tremont, the neighborhood of East Tremont, which for the record is a neighborhood in the Bronx, I would say Central Bronx, something like that, you know. And in the spirit of the guest today, I have created a slide deck. I probably should have mentioned this at the beginning of the podcast, but whenever you guys can both look at the deck so you have visual and a visual idea of what I'm talking about, and just whenever I say next slide, you know, you can go to the next slide.
And for the listeners, it's going to be in the podcast episode description.
Yes.
Oh, fun.
Yes. Yeah. For people who want to follow along, I will say I am one of those psychos who listens to "Well, There's Your Problem" with no visual stimulus. It's just me doing bike messenger shit and just listening to you describe like, okay, so this is the you know, tensile strength of 441 steel, and being like, oh yeah, here we go.
This is concrete legs, Mike, right here.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, so got everything set up here. So I'm going to go ahead and just proceed. Do you guys see, David? Do you see that apartment complex?
Oh, it looks great. Oh, I love the green tops, the green little pointies.
You like that?
They did a good job on these.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is 705 Crotona Park North. It's right up against the aforementioned Crotona Park and is smack dab in the middle of East Tremont. This building was built in 1916, which is about as old as the building that I currently live in. You're going to live in a lot of 100-year-old buildings if you live in New York. I have never personally been inside this particular building, but I did ride by it one time when I was.
It's a residential thing.
Yeah, it's a residential. Looks like it's about 4 or 5 stories. And I rode by it when I rode through Crotona Park about 3 months ago on the way to Laconia, which is in like a northeast portion of the Bronx, adjacent to Co-op City. I was delivering a package.
Nice.
I don't know who lives there. But I do know that in the 1950s, it was a multi-generational family where different parts of the family lived on different stories. And there was a ton of fucking kids because it was like 1959-ish. And the country was smack dab in the middle of the baby boomer generation. You know, it was a
Everyone had
kids.
73 kids, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, this is prime time for, you know, home movies of people smoking inside. 40-year-olds who look like 60-year-olds, and like grandma lives on the top level, or rather probably the bottom level actually, and then the parents and the kids live in the middle, and then, you know, probably like a pedophile lives on the top level. You know, it's all
Sally Draper. Sally Draper was making cocktails for Don and serving them out at cocktail parties and stuff. Same period. Time period.
Same time period. That's happening probably 70 blocks south, though, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah. You go to the next slide. I tried to find a couple images of this period. This right there, that's the Fox Crotona Theater on the left.
Ooh.
It's a lovely little theater. It opened around 1912, closed around 59 when it became a warehouse. The Wikipedia apparently said it played vaudeville, so it was probably a lovely place to watch a train come at the screen and just startle.
Terrifying.
That was the Ring for the time.
Yeah, the latest Ari Aster feature is just like a boat slowly appearing in the distance and scaring the crap out of everyone.
Yeah, they didn't have porn theaters at the time, so it was just like guys creeping in so they could watch Triumph of the Will or something like that, or what's that other one?
Birth of a Nation.
Birth of a Nation. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one. That's the one that I watched in film class about 10 years ago,
and for fun 5 years ago.
Yes. Yeah, just for fun. Just for fun. On the right there, you see a bunch of the boomers that I mentioned. It's kind of hard to tell because it's in black and white, but it is actually somewhat of a multicultural scene. There's a lot of Puerto Rican kids, a lot of white kids, some Jewish kids, et cetera, Eastern European. And that's because East Tremont in the 40s and 50s was actually somewhat integrated, unlike other neighborhoods. It wasn't necessarily like, the Upper East Side or the Upper West Side, where it was strictly just like the very white, or Harlem or Williamsburg.
What do you think? Like,
for
was
that
like
matter.
was this like a working class neighborhood, middle class, upper class?
It was a working class. That's part of that's actually one of the things that I'm going to get into. And you might be asking yourself, like, well, why are you talking about this building? Why are you talking about all this stuff? And I'm talking about it because that building at the beginning, 705 Crotona Park North, that was actually home to my mom's family back in the day. My mom grew up. That's right. She grew up in that building at 705 Crotona Park North before moving over to Yonkers in the 60s and 70s.
Cool.
And I know all that stuff because I've seen the home videos. I've seen the boomers running around, the children, the Rainbow Coalition, and it's a weird kind of juxtaposition because this is in East Tremont, which was home to one of the weirdest like PR infrastructural engineering disasters, which is next slide. Oh, it's the Cross Bronx Parkway. Yay!
Oh.
Yeah. Woo!
Oh.
That's right. Yeah. The Cross Bronx Parkway. What can we say about it? Keep in mind, throughout the development of New York City in the 20th century, there was plenty of highways and parkways that absolutely destroyed people's lives. There was a lot of them. The Brooklyn Queens Expressway did lots of that. The Belt Parkway, the Triborough Bridge. These are all things that messed up people's lives in like Astoria, Sunset Park, portions of Williamsburg, and what have you.
Were there any highways to Hell's Kitchen?
I was about to say, yeah, I think one of those was planned. That was one of the ones that got canceled.
There was supposed to be 3 major highways that went right across Manhattan. There was the proposed Midtown Expressway, which, if I'm not mistaken, I think was supposed to just basically slash right through like 33rd or 32nd Street.
It's fine.
Yeah. That's just it.
I've seen renderings of it where the idea was they were going to run the freeway about 10 stories in the air, and they were just going to have it punch through buildings.
It's like a real metropolis vibe for
Yeah.
sure.
Can you imagine being in the building on the floor right below the highway? Just constant fear. I cannot imagine how death-defying that would feel.
I was about to say, yeah. I hope they have a way station before the trucks get on that bridge.
Oh my God! Just those 1950 era diesels, just like, absolutely making just like a theme park of just vibration. It would have been like where the MetLife building is right now in New York City, which used to be the Pan Am building,
right?
Where the traffic literally drives through the building, and you kind of look at it now, and you're just like, "Oh, that's fun. I like that. That's kind of a goofy little side thing."
Yeah.
And then multiply that by like 20 easily, like like going through that many buildings.
It'd be worse than being in the office underneath the highway. Would be the one right above it, and someone has an overheight load.
Yeah. Dude, I always think of that one building in South Carolina that is conspicuously 1 foot shorter than all other crossings. It's a train track. So like for literally 3 decades, cars and trucks that were just like a little bit too tall would try to go under it and just get can openered.
All right, the 11'8" bridge. That's a good one. They just raised it. It sucks.
I mean, it was perfect. It was a testament to people who hate box trucks and just like just because like you watch those YouTube videos and it's like what's going to happen. You're coming for a very similar product every single time, and it's to watch a U-Haul just get absolutely like the security deposit ripped off of it. You know, it's beautiful.
This seems like something that, like, if you're a henchman in a James Bond film, that you should really be careful of in the next chase scene.
Yes.
This isn't going to end. James is going to get away, but you're toast, buddy.
Oh, if you are an extra in Goldfinger, you better watch out. That's gonna be real bad for you. But today we're talking about the Cross Bronx and a couple of things that it did. Number one, the horror it wreaked on the populace both before and after it was built. Number two, the money it cost to build. And number three, just kind of the logistical nightmare it took to make it. And you might be asking yourself, well, who made this? And I will tell you, it was just one of the few Yale graduates to give George W. Bush a real run for his money on how evil he was. Next slide. And that's, the big man himself. Oh, Robert Moses.
Yeah.
There he is. Oh, there he is.
Look at his
Probably.
face.
Yeah, dude, that's
Yeah.
I want to, based on the map that's behind him, I want to say that was taken in like 1960 because that looks like World's Fair design
Right.
stuff.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, that was like his last thing as the World's Fair, and that was something he screwed up so badly that, you know, it kind of fucked over his career.
He very famously, there was a World's Fair, this is a side, but there was like a World's Fair commission, and he, you know, when you have a World's Fair, you want to have, you know, countries that are participating in your World's Fair, but a lot of them didn't want to do it because Robert Moses wouldn't let them do it to like their specifications or, you know, some odd little detail like that.
These country exhibitions are a little too ethnic, I think.
How about some American countries? Can we do that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the funniest one was how they let Spain in at the time, which seems innocuous enough in 2020 times until you realize that at the time, Francisco Franco was in charge. So there was a lot of open dictators coming in at the time for the World's Fair.
World's Fair, woo!
Yeah. Just some notes on the before I really get into this. This presentation was essentially fueled by my desire to actually get through The Power Broker. I don't know if you guys have read it or not. It really gives The Stand. It's right there with The Stand in terms of just long, heavy books.
Oh yeah, it's El Grande right there.
It's the
Yeah,
it's the nonfiction man. It's the nonfiction man's infinite jest.
it's what everyone has in the background of their Zoom calls on like the news and crap, so they can show how well read they are.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. I don't know if you, but you know, full disclosure, I read it sort of. I audiobook read it.
Oh, yeah.
That was the only way that I could get through it.
The Thinking Man's book.
I'd highly recommend it because Robertson Dean from, I think, Deep Space Nine reads it, and he has an amazing baritone voice. It's beautiful. Yes. But yeah, Justin, how long do you think the audiobook is? I've been telling Gabe and David for weeks now. How long do you think it is?
I'm gonna guess 36 hours or something crazy like that.
It is 66 hours.
66 hours. Wow.
It is 66 hours of content. It took me like months just to get through it while I was riding a bicycle delivering food to people. So
If it were 36 hours, he'd have to read that book in a soprano, you know, just kind of like, and then
people kept telling me listen to it at 1.5 speed. I'm like, no, I'm not a monster. All right.
Those people are weird. I don't like those
It's
people.
weird.
I don't trust you if you listen to a podcast sped up.
Yeah, so just for anybody who is following along, though, if you want most of the citations that I'm using for this, that's going to be coming from Chapter 37, which is called 1 Mile.
Robert Moses kind of looks like Mitch McConnell, doesn't he?
Well, he's certainly in the same league of effectively wielding power.
Yeah. It's like if Mitch McConnell and Rahm Emanuel had a child.
Yes, it's like, damn, why can't we have these people on our side?
Everyone's just fucking hot and ineffective on the left.
So yeah, one thing I was saying was, keep in mind that like he never had a bridge fall over due to negligence, and he never went to jail for any financial crimes. So he kind of like perfectly walked the bleeding edge of both financial crime and just sort of like inappropriate engineering and architectural design, so to speak. But it does make his life somewhat unique because he did it for decades. He was essentially in power from 1930 to 1960. And,
Wow.
Large swaths of that time, he basically was kind of able to push things full bore whenever he decided an idea was worth doing. He also sort of facilitated this transition in financial crime for the time, because in early 20th century New York City, crime was way more obvious in how it was dealt with. It was painfully obvious. Like, one of the more corrupt Tammany Hall mayors of the era was Jimmy Walker, and he was mayor in the 20s. And at that time, he had situations where like his accountant would have like a ledger, and it would say like 50 pounds of concrete asphalt for et cetera,
Crimes.
$50. Crime. Yeah. And it would just crime, like the word crime would like literally be on the ledger.
Yeah.
But Robert Moses very much ushered in and was part of the wave of people who, instead of writing crime on the ledger, would just put consultant or consulting fee.
Robert Moses was the first neo-lib.
Very much so. He very much did that. And I think before I talk about him, the best way to describe him. Oh, next slide. So we're on the 5th slide now. This is what he was basically involved in the greater New York City area. So there's also, keep in mind, there's more stuff out on Long Island.
Wow.
And he also made a power dam in upstate New York.
Wow.
Yeah. Basically, like, the best way to describe his impact is on the next slide here, number 6. It is impossible to say that New York City would have been a better city if Robert Moses had never lived. It is possible to say only that it would have been different. That is the best way to describe him. There are still people now who basically have large contentions like, no, what he did was actually good. And, I think more recently there's been a much more vociferous debate on, like, actually everything he did was bad. But really all we can know at this point is that it would have been different,
Oh, so some of the biggest things it looks like is he built highways.
He built highways.
Yes.
He was the parks commissioner. So he built a lot of parks, or little parks, teeny little guys.
Okay.
Playgrounds,
Cool.
swimming pools.
Lots of recreational and athletic facilities, and not so much in terms of like a general use park. That was one of the innovations Robert Moses brought to the world of parks. Is, rather than having a nice open grassy field or something like that, it's like, no, this is going to be a bunch of poorly maintained baseball fields instead.
Yeah, that was his big thing, because in the early 20th century, you had, flawed characters like Teddy Roosevelt, who were very into like shooting rhinos in the face. But also one of the things he said was like, you have to conserve. There's conservation,
Yeah.
And then people like that, like Ansel Adams, who would take pictures of, the Yellowstone National Park and be like, look at this, look at nature and all its majesty and beauty. We have to conserve this. Robert Moses was much more in the recreational point or basket. So it kind of feels and looks like conservation for a second until you realize you're putting a bocce ball court that'll fall apart in 20 years.
Putting your legs up. Robert Moses. Did Robert Moses, was he the guy who put in all those like really weird like exercise gym equipment that sits outside. You know, that's just like in random places and parks. You guys know what I'm talking about?
The fitness trails.
No, I've
the fitness trails.
Yeah. There's for people who don't live in New York City. There's these weird, I guess, sort of like tension based exercise equipment.
Yeah.
You know, there's not weights on them. They're like springs. So I guess that's how you're supposed to get absolutely yoked out of your mind in New York City. I will say though, fun fact: I recently saw one of those in the neighborhood I live in, which was Bushwick, and Robert Moses was going to build an expressway smack dab in the middle of Bushwick. He was going to do that. It was going to be called the Bushwick Expressway. So rest assured, the 1970s could have been even worse than they were for that neighborhood at the time.
In the fact that it wouldn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
It would just look like Running Man, you know.
Be memorialized in name by the freeway that destroyed it.
Yes, exactly. So this is the earliest picture of him that I could find somewhat easily. This is actually literally from the book, The Power Broker. Moses, so you guys know, he was born 100 years before I was born, which is 1888.
Wow.
He was part of the Lost Generation, or those who likely fought in World War I. However, Robert Moses was probably the last thing from Lost, as he did not fight in World War I and was hilariously well off for the time. He was one of the last recipients of what you might call the Gilded Age. He was very much like Rockefeller, where his success was essentially rooted in his grandparents' accumulated wealth.
Oh yeah. Cool guy.
Yeah. Very cool guy.
He earned being born by his grandparents.
Yes.
You gotta earn that.
Don't quote me exactly on this because there's numbers all over the book on this, but in 1900 money, he had, or rather his family had, about $1 million in assets.
Yeah.
yeah. And having $1 million in 1900 is the equivalent of about having 31-ish million in 2020 money.
Damn, that's almost as much as Ponzi scheme makes every year.
I know, man.
Yeah. Damn. So leftist podcasting is the only growth industry left in America. That's what I always say.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't just be a little Lord Fauntleroy anymore. He had butlers. He did equestrian shit. He literally grew up 2 blocks away from Yale in New Haven, Connecticut, where he did eventually go. His wealth was built up by...
He grew up 2 blocks from Yale?
Yes, on Dwight Street.
So
yes.
he went to college at home. Like he just...
Yes.
What a louse. He went to community college.
I mean, look, I'll give him a little bit of points because he was a Jewish guy, and Yale, not super into the Jews at the time. Keep in mind, in 1900, the Skull and Bone Society is 80 years old, so they've got their traditions set, even by the time he goes to college.
Oh yeah.
Do you think they enforced some kind of on-campus housing requirement that made them move 2 blocks into a dorm?
Yeah. Modern day colleges would require that sort of shit. You know?
Yeah.
Like back in the day, like college used to just be like the place where your grandfather and father went, and you were gonna needed to go to before you could take over the law firm or whatever. And like they did not care about like your on-campus housing experience and like whether you had enough extracurriculars, and like now the whole college experience is completely manicured, and they'll totally require you to move 2 blocks, and because you need to have access to the rock climbing wall. And the only way to have access to the rock climbing wall is if you have a student ID card, and if the only way to get a student ID card is if you are an on-campus resident. You know, like that sort of shit.
Yeah, no, the only difference between now and then is instead of a student ID card, Yale probably just has like a cursed skeleton key that allows you, like access to the ice cream sandwich cabinet.
You had to wear the right tie.
Yes. Yeah.
There's a Horcrux in every tie,
Yeah, literally, yeah.
Okay. Sick, dude. Okay, I skipped ahead to look at the next slide. Hell yeah, dude. I don't know what this means. But I'm stoked to find out.
You'll find out, David, because I'm about to talk about his father, Emmanuel Moses, because he ran a series of successful drugstores. That did allow them to move to New York City around at the turn of the century when he sold them off. But the reason he sold them off was because he was forced to by, and then this is next slide, his Bella Moses, Robert Moses' mom, who was there's not really a good term for it. She hectored him. She hectored him very very intently, and Robert Moses was an intense mama's boy, very in love with his mother.
I am just, guys, I'm just biting my lip on the self-hatred, all the anti-Semitic jokes I could be making right now. I'm just gonna let it all slide by.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and look, it's not like he hated his father. It's just, even in the book, they kind of mentioned that he was just a bit of a ghost. Like he would just exist in their house and like start to have a conversation. And then his mom would just sort of talk over him and just be like, "Oh, nobody gives a shit, dear."
Okay,
like,
okay. I got one. So this this kid comes home from school one day, and he says to his mom, I got a role in the school play," and she's like, "Oh, great. What is it?" And he's like, "Well, I'm playing a Jewish husband," and the mom gets furious and she says, you need to go back to school. You need to march back and talk to your teacher and say that you want a speaking role.
I haven't heard that one, David. That's very good. I like that.
Yep. Oh yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah. So there wasn't any love lost between them. It's just that his mother was incredibly influential in his life. She was very involved in local groups that sort of, helped Jewish refugees from Europe who were immigrating at the time.
Nice.
And she was obsessed with civil service. That is essentially why Robert Moses became who he was. Next slide, number 10. It is worth noting, though, that Robert Moses was very smart. He was excelled early on, and sooner rather than later, he figured out that civil service work was what he wanted to do, which pleased his mother to no end. He was built like a tank. He was like 6'2", handsome, charismatic. He had longevity on his side. He died in 1981. So,
wow.
Yeah, he lived to be like 92, something like that. It's also extremely well documented that all into his life, even into his 80s, he would dive into the Long Island Sound and just start swimming. And many times, people just thought he drowned. He had been out there for so long.
Whoa.
He was a very, very, very strong swimmer his entire life. It actually is one of the one of the reasons that he built pools.
If his name was really Moses, then he could just part the waters. I mean, come on. Like, it's not even...
No, man, he went right through those things.
Yeah.
He studied at Yale, at Oxford, and he got his PhD at Columbia. And you might be asking yourself, well, Danny, this guy sounds big and strong. How bad can he be? And it
as we know, the stronger you are, the better of a person you are.
Yeah, you're bigger. Yeah, they call them strong men because they're so great. Yeah. And it turns out, next slide, incredibly, Robert Moses was an asshole. And he wasn't just one of those assholes where everybody hates you. He kind of ebbed more on the sociopath, borderline personality disorder side of things. He was incredibly charismatic, very charming. All the good stuff, however, he was very, very stubborn. And if you wronged him, he ruined your life, and that's really not much of an exaggeration. He is, I know it seems hack to describe him this way, but he is very much the synthesis of a person like Jeff Bezos and Donald Trump. Donald Trump, he's kind of uncaring, doesn't really mind what's happening. He's very singularly focused in that he cares about himself and his own, pursuits. And Jeff Bezos
Also hot.
is kind of this, yes, incredibly smoking boss.
I love it when you smile, Don. You look so handsome when you smile.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. You look so handsome. Ooh, I want to pet you. And then, Jeff Bezos, he is sort of this uncaring automaton, but he's it's like he's got a fast processor in his brain. He's very smart. And Robert Moses, he's just kind of the both of those guys, Remember how I mentioned how his mom, helped out with Jewish settlement in New York City? Apparently, that feeling was much more of like a patriarchal imposition than anything else.
Ooh.
There was a lot of Russian and German Jews coming to New York at the time.
Oh, yeah.
And Bella Moses worked with this foundation called the Madison House that basically helped people immigrate. But, quote, two characteristics of Madison House were soon became apparent. One was a characteristic shared by many American German Jews who traveled to the Lower East Side in carriage and cab from their servanted enclaves. Remember, this is like the ultra-rich Midtown and Upper East Side at the time. It was characteristic that their chroniclers called their quote-unquote philanthropy. However, in reality, this was closer to patronage. For while the motives pushing these people forward to help the poor Jews were in fact manifestations of what is referred to as tzedakah, or the religious principle of charity.
You pronounced it exactly right.
I did?
No, you didn't.
Oh. They have found that many American Jews, solid, respectable, and Americanized, were embarrassed by their gruff, uncouth, shaggy-bearded, conspicuously un-American counterparts. Quote, the people, unquote, the Germans thought were loud, pushy, aggressive, and, quote, the dregs of Europe.
Nice.
The American German Jews even coined a term for their co-religionists, a word based on the fact that many Russian names end with the letters K-I. Now, I will not be saying any slurs on the podcast today.
Oh, that's where that word comes from?
Yeah, man, it's weird.
Of course the
it's
German
really
Jews-
strange.
I'm sorry. Of course the German Jews. I'm a German Jew, but of course German Jews came up with that. They're the most anti-Semitic ones of all.
I mean, you can always blame the Germans for like lots of bad stuff. I mean, the Germans are constantly doing bad things.
I mean, look, they can make a hell of a mirror and a watch, but at what cost, Yeah, and it's really important. I'm saying this anecdote because it's important to note that what Bella Moses thought was what Robert Moses thought. Mm-hmm. His building and construction was very much rooted in an I know best mentality,
And also probably some disdain for the poor, right? Like it's important to know that like German Jews were much wealthier and generally much more integrated in like normal, bourgeois cosmopolitan society than like all the Polish and Russian Jews, which were like 90% of the Jewish population. So so it was it was a lot of class stuff in there too. I had a German Jewish grandmother, and she was great lady. She always, like, growing up, she would tell us this term that was like a way to describe someone who was low class. She was like, people would throw this word around. It was called Hinter Berlin, which means behind Berlin. So a way of calling someone white trash would say that they live east of Berlin, basically.
Wow.
Yeah. So
well, I mean, it's funny.
She never said that. She just said that it was a term that existed.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. That sentiment very much was sort of like it's very class based at the time. And remember, Robert Moses, ultra rich for the time. He and remember also, he's also Jewish, but he was basically an atheist and was pretty anti-Semitic.
This is
his
the classic
tenure.
book Jew versus money Jew scenario, right? Like money Jews like Robert Moses and like Mike Bloomberg are really, really looked down upon book Jews or just like shtetl Jews. It's a big problem we have in our community. I did not realize that this episode was going to be as Jewish focused as it has become. Just tell me when to shut up and we can just talk about municipal stuff.
No, it's important to mention. I mean, and also I should mention he was just regular racist too. Like he didn't like black people.
Oh.
Like,
Famously, yeah. He also did not like the Swedes. That was an interesting one.
Really?
oh yeah, that's
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, that's got some whimsy to it.
yeah. I don't think I'm gonna get in too much trouble for this because I am part Italian, but like he was very well known for just calling LaGuardia a guinea all the time. Like he
Not the airport, the person.
Fiorello LaGuardia. Yeah, he called him all the Italian slurs, which I mean in 2020 are fun. Italian slurs are fun in 2020.
The only man he respected in like any fashion was Al Smith.
Yes, they're bromance.
Yeah, they were bros.
I loved it.
Al Smith kind of
David
sucked, didn't he?
Al Smith was well, okay, Justin, I don't know if you can maybe speak to it because like my impression from reading the book was essentially that Al Smith was like he was absolutely a Tammany Hall piece of work, but he was genuinely grew up a poor person and did try to help people.
Yeah, I haven't read the book in a while. I remember Al Smith did come off as like a pretty genuine guy, even if he's, I mean, he's pulling the patronage strings everywhere.
I mean, keep in mind, Tammany Hall is a real and absolutely still happening thing at this time, and Al Smith is absolutely part of it. But he was a very genuine person.
He was the governor of New York and ran for president in 1928 and lost against Herbert Hoover. And he always, from what I heard, he really resented FDR after he took power, and he ended up being kind of like anti-New Deal because of Roosevelt's success. He was a little bit jealous of or something.
Yeah, he had Roosevelt. He kind of promised, like he's like, oh, I'm going to be nice to you and everything, but Al Smith, he was kind of a busybody. So when he was not governor anymore and he didn't hold any elected officials, he just kind of got pissed. Like he just started pissed and old. I believe he died in the 40s. But a fun anecdote is that Robert Moses, maybe the only nice thing he's done for anybody, period, is that he opened the Central Park, he revitalized the Central Park Zoo, almost specifically for Al Smith, because Al Smith loved animals.
Aww.
And he loved animals, and he gave him a key so he could go in at any time, day or night, and just say hello to the elephants.
That sounds like that sounds like the ending to Home Alone 2.
Yeah. Robert Moses, the way it's a well-known fact that he was pretty racist towards black people, but one of the ways it manifested itself is literally in his architecture and design. A lot of the original parkways that he created that would go to Jones Beach, for example, and places out in Long Island, they would have bridges and overpasses that would go over them. But instead of being, I think, 11 feet, they would only be 10 feet, which effectively stopped buses from using them. And I don't know if you know this, but poor people use the bus. So,
oh my God, are you kidding me?
No, he did it. He made these, and a lot of them had these beautiful facades on them and everything like that, but they were specifically for cars. He also later on in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, refused to get rid of, acquire right of ways 20 feet to the right and left of highways and expressways that would have been land that you could have used for a train, essentially. Or subways.
Oh yeah, he couldn't stand the Long Island Railroad, and the Long Island Railroad just really went to shit under Robert Moses's period of influence.
He hated it so much, actually, that like even in like the 50s, when like post-war, you know, you have communities who like live in Long Island. It's become like more of a community essentially. So you have businessmen like Don Draper types who live out there.
Right.
They would take the Long Island Railroad in, and it would be like this rickety ass 1920s thing with broken windows, and like it was falling apart, and during the winter it would be like 30 degrees inside there, and It was like this hilarious juxtaposition where like these are guys who are, you know, making more money than they could possibly imagine and actually achieving like a middle class lifestyle, and they're riding this like hilarious like toot toot like train that's falling apart, you know.
So why did Robert Moses believe in cars so much? Like what
David, you dovetailed perfectly into my next slide. Number 12. Beautiful. So here's a question. Does anybody know why this picture on the left is wrong?
Franklin Delano Roosevelt is driving?
No, it does involve who's driving, though.
It does. Yeah, Justin knows. Yeah. David, do you know why this picture is wrong?
Oh, this is like a puzzle from like from like Reader's Digest. There's something wrong with it, you know. I'm not gonna just go ahead and tell me.
Well, Robert Moses never learned to drive a car.
Yeah.
He created like hundreds of miles of expressways. Fucking hated trains with all of his might. And this picture is a staged picture, I believe, sometime in like the 50s, of him supposedly paying a toll booth,
which is another thing he didn't do. He never paid tolls.
Well, it's funny, you know, he drove a fucking big ass Packard limousine for most of the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and then in the 50s and 60s drove a Cadillac and never paid a toll, which was a big imposition of the time, because back in the day when you created an expressway in New York City or a parkway, the way it would work is when the parkway was being built, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but you would impose tolls so that it would help pay for whatever bond issues got made to fund that bridge or parkway, what have you.
Yeah.
And then after they finished completely financing everything and paying everything back, they'd get rid of the tolls. It's kind of unheard of today, but they would remove the tolls, and then people could just ride on that bridge or what have you for free. But Robert Moses, and I believe the Triborough Authority reversed that 100% and made it so that these bridges and tunnels and etc. kind of remain tolled in perpetuity.
So that sounds right to me, because I got to do repairs and stuff. But like tell me, Robert Moses was Parks Commissioner in New York, but he also had a couple other.
Yes.
He was also in a couple other organizations, some of them which he founded. What were those, really quick?
Oh God, off the top of my head,
he wore many hats.
Yeah, he was Triborough Authority Commissioner. I don't know if commissioner is the right word. He was the Long Island Parks board member or something like that. The Bethpage. He had a construction building position. He was a part of an electrical power position as well. That's how he made the dam up in Messina. He held. I know the number. To answer your question, David, he held at his absolute height of power, he held 12 simultaneous.
Oh my God!
Positions.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
Jesus.
It's what you'd call a conflict of interest.
It was also the secret to getting so much stuff done in such a short period of time, though, is because he owned all these public agencies. He could or he was in charge of all these agencies, public authorities, so on and so forth. You know, all these authorities could coordinate with each other really well because there was only one guy who was making decisions.
It was just Robert Moses talking to himself in the mirror.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think they kind of make a point of it in the book. Like it doesn't. I mean, he lived under, or he worked under like 5 mayors, fucking 5 presidents, all this stuff, and most of his shit happened. What he wanted to get built usually got built, and it was because he had such amazing leverage. Once he became more involved specifically in New York City as opposed to just Long Island, that's why so much car infrastructure got built. And the problem with this is that, Robert Moses didn't really have a perception of what it was to drive. Like I said, he was always carted around in limousines. And because he was constantly busy doing work, he just used them as offices. So it didn't really matter if he was in traffic or what have you. He had access to all the stuff he always needed and was always going places. So he never really felt that ennui of being like stuck in traffic and like not being able to go anywhere, Also, like I said, he was born in 1888 when cars were being invented. So his concept of a car was much more of as like a pleasure vehicle.
This is like if Steve Jobs didn't use a computer, or like
yes.
I mean, this guy is like Mr. Highway. That's like really what he seemingly loved more than anything, and yet he denied his most indulgent pleasures from himself.
I mean, he got into road building through parkways, right? Which were, as they were originally conceived, it's supposed to be like a nice, pleasurable, scenic drive, as opposed to what parkways have become, which is just another, car sewer. But this one has curbs and brown signs.
Yes. Yeah. No. The concept of commuting did not exist. People would get in their fucking Packards in 1912. And just be like, oh, we're going to go out to the Jones Beach Recreation Center. Just like that was their experience.
You got a good old Stanley steamer. You got to park it every 12 miles because it doesn't have enough steam to keep going.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, in cities, at the turn of the 20th century in cities, you weren't getting around in cars. You were more likely being carted around in horse-drawn buggies, or this ingenious new invention from France called the bicycle. The bike was a huge popular thing at the beginning of the 20th century. There were literal track racing events in Madison Square Garden 100 years ago. And the car really only became more commonplace in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and so on. They were not built well. They didn't last. Like Justin was describing, they broke frequently, and they were largely novelties. And more specifically, they were vehicles of the upper middle class and the rich, which leads me to my next point, slide number 13. Robert Moses was the first Karen, unfortunately. He was a big time Karen. What I mean by that is whenever he spoke about being a public servant or serving people, what he was really saying was, I am going to serve my people, which is the upper middle class and the very rich and white people. That is who he was trying to serve.
And the bird watchers of Central Park.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. This is kind of a weird little sidebar, but Moses was a huge pioneer for the day because for the first 38 years of his life, he was essentially an unpaid intern, which I mean quite literally. Like every position he held up until then, he was volunteering for, and he was wholly taken care of financially and otherwise by his mother and his wife, which is only possible because he was rich.
Yes.
That was the only way he could do it. There's funny anecdotes about how when he studied at Oxford, before he went, he was like somewhat well put together, as much as, he looked nice for the time. But after he left Oxford in England, he took on that sort of like shaggy basement dweller, elbow patches lifestyle and kind of look like a mess a lot of the times. And his mom and his wife would routinely buy his underwear, his suits, and his wife Mary had to give him pocket change to make sure he had money with him. Like he
that's normal. Come on, you gotta have your lady give you some walking money.
Some walking money for your yerba mates and whatnot.
Yeah, dude, come on. I mean, any self-respecting man will have his girlfriend give him kombucha money.
Yeah. But he truly was clueless to how real people lived, and that's reflective in his building style, whether it's his low bridges, how he built parks. By the way, he built almost no parks in Harlem. I wonder why. And how he just thought about people who were not him. He was very pretentious. He thought everybody was below him. He thought he was smarter than everybody. A fun fact is that he actually designed and constructed a bunch of swimming pools so that they were a couple degrees colder because he thought that, quote, black people don't like cold water. That was everybody was the rabble to him. Everybody who was not him was the rabble.
And yet he is in charge of all municipal public infrastructure. It's
yes.
Literally every single thing.
Yeah.
Did he ever hold elected office? I mean, this charming guy.
No,
that was one of his strategies, right? He's a dedicated public servant, not a politician. That's why he was relatively well liked for most of his career. He had a good public. There's a good public opinion of him because he's trying to play up. I'm a dedicated public servant. I'm not like these power hungry politicians. Despite the fact he had consolidated more power in his several positions than anyone has or will ever.
Yes,
he's got
I think it's like Robert Moses and Alexander the Great. Maybe those are the two.
Yeah,
he's got all of his titles on his shirt, like they're military badges. Yeah,
he looks like those sheriffs in Arizona who are trying to look like the army, so they just put a bunch of ribbons on their breast pocket. Yeah, and as Justin is saying, I think one of the best examples of what he's describing, that sort of unabated power, is what happened with the Battery Park Tunnel, which I'll just very briefly talk about. Slide 14. So, David, I don't know if you know this, but, we're all familiar with the Battery Park Tunnel. It's a tunnel that goes underwater. But for a while, it was not supposed to be a tunnel. It was supposed to be a bridge. There was going to be a battery bridge. And it was all Robert Moses's idea and what have you. But why is that bad? Why is that bad, Danny? We have the Brooklyn Bridge. We have the Manhattan Bridge. Those are staples of New York architecture. Why not a battery bridge? And the problem with that is that the Brooklyn Bridge and the Manhattan Bridge were built in 1883 and 1909. And the construction of the battery bridge was supposed to happen in 1940. And suffice it to say that Manhattan had been grown quite a bit in 30 years. Oh, no, I'm just saying it would have destroyed large swaths of Battery Park. And it actually, the only really reason that this bridge didn't get made is because I think Eleanor Roosevelt protested. And then even after every city commissioner and every sort of bureaucratic group had okayed the bridge, it still had to be approved federally. So what happened is the War Commission had to approve it. And again, at the time, FDR is president. Eleanor Roosevelt doesn't like the bridge. So she says, have the War Commission nix it and say that it's like a liability in wartime. And that's why it didn't get made. That it literally took the president of the United States to stop Robert Moses's plan.
And he still decided, just to really twist the knife in. If he wasn't going to get his bridge, he was still going to do as much damage to Battery Park as possible. He tried to get Castle Clinton torn down. He managed to. He kicked out the aquarium from there, at least, very, very suddenly, like in the middle of the night. So all the fish are going in bags, and we're putting them on a truck.
There was an aquarium in Lower Manhattan?
Yes, David,
Yeah.
There was an aquarium, a beautiful aquarium.
Fuck that. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, Castle Clinton being where they do store all of the adrenochrome currently.
Yes.
He almost destroyed Castle Clinton. The only reason it didn't get is because after FDR died, Harry Truman, I believe, stopped it and said, no, this is a landmark now. But he was out of spite about to basically destroy it. And he did successfully destroy the aquarium, which is why it's now all the fucking way in Coney Island, like way, way, way at the very end of the subway. And keep in mind, it used to be like people love that damn aquarium, but he just like, no, fuck that, we're destroying it right now, and then it was gone. Yeah, so this kind of brings us up to the present over the up to slide 15. So East Tremont in its current form, bit of a rough place. A little rougher rather than not rough. It's out of the 48 it ranks 48th precinct out of 56 out of safest per capita crime areas, and that was in 2010. There were some non-fatal assault rates of 152 out of 100,000. East Tremont on Belmont rates of violent crime is higher than the city as a whole, as well as their incarceration. But it has much more humble kind of working class beginnings. Next slide. This is slide 16.
Human Remains that was in there. Isn't there like a British TV comedy show called Human Remains?
What's it about?
I don't know. I just thought I'd heard of it before. Is that
I don't know.
You, David.
I don't know, man. I was just wondering what the image said. Did they like find DVDs of that, or is it?
Yeah. So we're on 16 now. We're on 16. So this is East Tremont in 1910. Pretty quaint. This is what it was. It was a quiet, cheap, reasonable place to live in an otherwise giant city. Most of the people who lived here were Jewish refugees fleeing from Eastern Europe, a lot of them fleeing pogroms and czars and what have you. It's also important to remember that a lot of these people were doing just well enough to flee the tenements in the Lower East Side, but they weren't super well off. They weren't super well off like Grand Concourse or Upper East Side people.
This wasn't like
pretty low.
This wasn't like some Mrs. Maisel households. This was
no.
All these people walking around, I just see them all being like, "I'm gonna have a great grandson named Danny. I'm gonna have a Danny one day."
Yes, exactly. Well, actually, that's funny because my grandmother grew up in Sunnyside, Queens, but that's a different story. Point being, it was a pretty low density. There was only 441 people per residential acre.
It's New York low density, of course. Not
yes, yeah.
It's very relative here.
Yeah. Keep that in perspective, people. There was an L. There was a train, and it was a boon for people who lived there because they could very easily get down to the garment district to work. That was the IRT White Plains line. Crotona Park, which I mentioned before, was right there. It was a huge park given the overall size of the neighborhood. The Bronx Zoo was one stop away. The Botanical Gardens were very close. This community also was fairly progressive for this time, and because a lot of them were older, they actually had socialist, communist, and American labor ties too. So we're talking about
there we go.
actual dyed in the wool communists.
I mean, there was it was a very common thing in working class neighborhoods around this time to have like newspapers, no real access to English language newspapers, and the only newspapers you had were like, languages in it, like they were like newspapers in a different language and generally socialist or communist sympathizing.
Yeah, I mean, it was a far cry from, you know, the kind of news landscape we have today. And I mean, it's important to note that it wasn't fake. You know, it was like real, true people with these actual beliefs, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Also, when landlords were first setting up the land in East Tremont, they were buying it for $2 a square foot. So the high end rent for one person would be, and this is the highest at the time, high end rent would be $100 per month for a 4-bedroom apartment. Also,
sounds good. I'm in.
Yeah.
When can I move?
Yeah. That was the high end. One person noted in the book, Sel Sherman, she was paying $69 a month. Nice.
Nice.
For
Nice.
a 3-bedroom apartment with a living room, kitchen, foyer, and dining area. So this is a affordable place to live.
Nice place.
And you know, I mentioned earlier in the podcast as well the concept of integration. You know, later on in the 1950s, there were a lot more Puerto Rican and black people moving into this area, and of the time, you know, white flight was rampant. If brown people moved into a neighborhood at the time, the white people would flee. But that was not the case with East Tremont. Whether it was for financial reasons or what have you, people were just like, okay, I live next to a brown person. Who fucking cares?
In general,
In
general, working class people are more likely to live in integrated communities. And that's still generally true today.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's impossible to say what everybody's viewpoints on it was, but I mean, you can kind of look at this neighborhood that was, you know, started out as a largely Jewish community, and instead of being fucking racist, they were just like, okay, we'll just be chill, and it was very successful in that right. And this all came to a screeching halt on December 4th, 1952. So on this day, a bunch of people got letters from Robert Moses saying, hey, just wanted to let you know that your house is in the way of my road, so I'm condemning it. You have 90 days to move.
Oh, my God. Wait.
Guess who's moving? You.
Yeah. Yeah. It's you.
And you said it was December 4th?
December 4th.
That's Jay-Z's
so,
birthday.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Coincidence? I think not.
So this is really where we start kind of getting into the grift and graft in the sort of light crime. Because first off, the 90-day notice, complete bullshit. I got a quote here. At the time, Moses had sent out a letter to the East Tremont neighborhood stretch, and this part of the expressway was nowhere to be in sight. It would not be there for months, if not years. The city had not even acquired title to the property yet, and there were months of procedures necessary before it could even begin demolishing. So the use of a 90-day figure was a quote, scare tactic to shake them up and get them moving, a Moses aide later explained. So the people who were living in this area and were in the middle of what would be the Cross Bronx eventually were like, well, we should look into this. We need to look into what's happened to other portions because parts of this highway have already been created at this time. So they went west and they found stuff like this. Next slide, number 18.
Oh, my God.
Quote, yes. Where once apartment buildings or private homes stood were now hills of rubble decorated with ripped open bags of rotting garbage that had been flung atop them. Huge bulldozers and earth-moving machines rumbled. A small army of grime-covered workers pounded in pride. Over the rumble of bulldozers came a staccato of jackhammering and occasionally the dull, concussive sound of dynamite, end quote. So the crazier part is that there were people still living in buildings adjacent to the work that had started on other portions of the highway. Apparently, Robert Moses had set up relocation committees or something to that effect, and
That
they had
sounds
just
ominous.
moved people. Yeah, dude, it's totally honest and cool. And they sent people to live in old demolished houses or places that were right next to destruction. So you had people, and these were apartments that had almost largely been abandoned. All the copper wire had been yanked out of the walls.
Wait, hold on. Didn't they relocated them and didn't give them like payment? Did they pay them to move? Because isn't that like an eminent domain thing?
Well, they probably paid the building owners. They didn't pay the tenants.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you were a homeowner, you would potentially get money. If you were a tenant, boy oh boy,
shit out of luck.
You would get, yeah.
Gotta go to
what you would get.
Gotta go to like chief eminent domain tenant, Commissioner Robert Moses. You know. Yes,
precisely. Honestly, what would happen is Moses would set up quote unquote tenant relocation committees, and what that meant is that a person would go to a building that was often only open for 2 hours a week, and then they would talk to a person who would basically threaten them and say, okay, we'll give you $200 to get out of your apartment this week. If you don't get out of it this week, we'll give you $100 the following week. If you don't get out of it the following week, then we'll only offer you $50.
Oh my God.
Yep.
Yeah. So he basically pushed people out and made it feel like there was no other recourse for anything. Next slide.
And lots of the relocation assistance just involved moving people into buildings which were also in the way of the project, which the city or Triborough happened to own.
Yes.
Yeah, and they just sort of shuffle people around until they drop out of the process and they don't have to worry about them anymore.
Yeah, they paid as little mind to them as they possibly could. And of course, the entire time, Moses is saying, like, let it be known that New Yorkers appreciate the ability to be told things the straight away and truthful way, and we will assure all of you that everything will be dealt with in a straight away and truthful way. And he's just lying, like he's just
lying. Yeah,
just straight to their faces. On slide 19, you'll see here the truly dumb part is that all this could have been avoided in many ways. You could still create the Cross Bronx Expressway without causing this much damage, because there were studies independent of Robert Moses that essentially showed if you moved the route 2 blocks south, you would save 1,500 apartments, and there wouldn't be this weird bulge in a otherwise straight road. There were hearings on whether or not this would be approved, but Moses basically strong-armed every politician and the Bronx Borough president into agreeing into his plans. And the other thing is there could have been a full-on legal battle to stop this section of the Cross Bronx from being created, but nobody who lived there was a lawyer. The costs would have, there were people willing to represent them, but they were quoting them at $10,000.
Are you kidding me? Isn't that supposed to be?
Yeah,
that should be pro bono for stuff like that.
I mean, there weren't lawyers living in fucking East Tremont at the time, so other people were like, "Yeah, we'll represent your case, but it's going to cost $10,000, 1950 money."
So, because I remember hearing, just in the little that I know about Robert Moses, about one of his main antagonists was named Jane Addams. Is that right, or did I get the name right?
Jane Jacobs.
Yes.
Jane Jacobs.
Yeah.
Jane Addams. I just dream about that woman. The second first lady. That's who I was thinking of. Common mistake. But Jane Jacobs, she basically stopped the West Village from getting the East Tremont treatment. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's actually funny. The book doesn't talk about that almost at all.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is something that Carl completely skipped. It's like a major chapter, and it's like, oh, it's not there. It's not in this book.
Why?
Yeah, I know. I don't know. I mean, I guess for what it's worth, it was a somewhat recent development. But he just focused on other stuff because I mean, it is important to note that like I said, it is the exception to the rule that Robert Moses doesn't get his way. Like, he always gets his way. The only reason the Midtown Expressway that we were mentioning earlier didn't get made is because somebody wanted to change it a little bit, and instead of getting to make his highway, which he could have made, Robert Moses just said, well, fuck that. If I can't have it exactly this way, it's not getting built. Like, it was just pure chance that the Midtown Expressway didn't get made.
Wow.
But yeah, so yeah, there could have been a legal battle to stop this, and Robert Wagner, who eventually became the mayor while this was going on, literally promised the people of East Tremont that he would stop this. And then Robert Moses told him, quote, "The city is not going to make that decision. The city pays only half the cost of land. It is federal and it is state money that is involved, and I represent these officials. If you try to move this expressway, you'll never get another nickel for us," end quote. And that's like how he functioned as a person. He would threaten people by basically ruining the possibility of people's political careers. And another big thing he would say is, after something had already been partially built, if somebody wanted to pull out of it, he'd be like, "Oh, what? Oh, what? You're just going to leave this half-built thing? People aren't going to like that. People aren't going to like that. We need to spend hundreds of millions and more dollars to finish this." Like, those were constant threats of his.
What accent was that, Danny?
time.
Was that Connecticut? Is that a Connecticut accent?
Yeah.
It's the only moral thing we can do is to tear down another 1,000 people's houses.
Yeah. It's the and this is actually where the conspiracy or the more conspiratorial part of this happens, because there was the option, like I said, for them to move this route 2 blocks south, so it would basically go right up against Crotona Park. And the problem with this for Moses is that it would have run into the 3rd Avenue bus transit depot at the time. And the problem with that is that transit company secretly told Moses that it did not want to have that condemned, for it was very strategic for its buses, and it was a long-held open secret that the Bronx political circles had interest in that depot. It is also speculated that Bronx Borough President James Lyon owned property along the alternative route. So, that didn't happen.
That's the grift.
January 1st, 1954. The city proceeds to turn the water and power off on anybody who is not vacated or who can't vacate. And keep in mind, a lot of these people who were living in these apartments were old. So they were born before Social Security happened, and they had no other choice. They had to stay in their apartments. That said, once the top floors of places were vacant, Moses would often proceed to tear the roofs off of houses that people were still living in on the lower floors.
Single-handedly?
Vandals. He ripped it off with his very strong hands.
Yes.
Swimmer's hands.
There was a ton of vandalism, huge amount of rodents and mice and rats and what have you. There was a bunch of crap on the ground, as well as mini dust storms and grime that caused apartments around them to become demolished. So everyone is kicked out of their houses that they didn't need to be kicked out of. What ends up happening to the Cross Bronx Expressway? Well, first off, Robert Moses, in typical fashion, wildly underestimates the true cost of it. When it was being planned, he said it would cost $47 million. It actually cost $250 million.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, which is $2.7 billion in 2020 money. Justin, you probably know a little about this. This was another big Moses tactic where very, very often he would go into commissioner hearings, park meetings, anything like that, and say, "I promise that the taxpayers of the city will pay $0." And then they would pay like $50 million. He absolutely loved saying that stuff costed way less than it actually did.
Well, I mean, one of the things is, since he's working under the as a public authority, if he has cost overruns, that's good for him. He can take out, so he can issue some more bonds. You know, he can start tolling stuff. That actually means more money for him if he spends more money. I mean, the way he manipulated the structure of the public authority to just allow him to print his own money was, incredible. Again, I wish we had, sometimes I wish we had these people on our side.
Yeah.
And they could issue,
no, it's
like his authority. He could issue debt, which is a pretty amazing thing, right? Like it's not every, like the MTA, I don't think can issue debt.
No.
Or wait, am I wrong?
I think they can. Well, I mean, Triborough was absorbed by the MTA at some point, so presumably they have some power.
Okay.
Yeah. It was essentially. I mean, he did sort of operate as his own little mini version of modern monetary theory.
Yeah,
because he was just able to be like, yeah, I can literally have up to, I think at the time it was like 500 million in potential debt, because that's what he was able to issue to himself. And in 1940, 50, 60, you could build a lot of shit with $500 million. And it's also important to remember the man has no concept of money. Even though he's rich, he hates money. He doesn't like to think about it. He doesn't like to think about what it means in society. I mean, it was actually well documented that like into his 40s and 50s, he had lots of money troubles because he lived these extravagant lifestyles. He lived in mansions. He sent his kids to private school. He had to have the best. So, and that absolutely, just floods into his building style. He just was like, what's $50 million? I don't fucking care. Like, I don't know what that is. Next slide, number 20. Construction on the Cross Bronx was also a nightmare. East Tremont is a very hilly neighborhood. And when you're building a road, there has to be something called grade crossings. I'm mostly unfamiliar with them, but it's my understanding that when you are making a highway, you want to have the road to be as level as possible. And if it isn't, it just messes up traffic. Do you know more about that, Justin?
So the grade is sort of the surface on which the highway sits, right? So,
yeah.
And sometimes grade refers to, sort of the amount of slope in the highway.
Okay.
So you might have a 1% grade. That means you go up 1 foot in 100 feet. You have 2%. That's 2 feet in 100 feet, so on and so forth, right? So if you're building in a very hilly neighborhood, these freeways, you can't really go over like 5-6% grades. So you gotta really start doing lots of cuts and fills. Start blasting all this bedrock out of the way, which is a big problem in the Bronx. If you go through the Cross Bronx Expressway, there's just these massive retaining walls. It's like you're going deep underground, but then you're immediately on a bridge. It's definitely a feat to drive a highway through this area. To say nothing of all the people you need at this place.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a bit of a logistical nightmare, which dovetails perfectly into my next slide, number 21. It's time to break out the dynamite, folks. First you heard the sound, and then a second later you felt the tremor and rumbling of the earth. End quote.
Me
essentially,
farting.
Yeah. Nice. Essentially, Robert Moses bombed the shit out of underneath East Tremont.
Yep.
People likened it to living next to an air raid. People's houses that were not supposed to be demolished actually began to develop cracks in their foundations and the facades and had to be evacuated. Another thing that happened was the dust. All the blasting and construction made a fine particulate, and it blanketed the neighborhood. It made it impossible to ever feel clean. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but inhaling fine dust is really bad for you.
Yes.
I
Now
don't know.
me.
Have you ever, Justin, have you ever worked with like dynamite or anything like that, or know any of the specifics of it?
I have worked on one controlled demolition.
Okay.
And that was a public housing tower in Queen Village in Philly. I'm the bad guy tearing down public housing.
Nice.
And yeah, today when you do like controlled demolition or you do like blasting or something like that, you need all these you need to like evacuate people out of the area. You need to, set up a sort of cordon line where people can't go further than this because they'll inhale too much dust. You gotta move everyone out of the way. But if you're doing and that's controlled demolition, which always does a lot of, throws up a lot of dust. There's not much you can do about it. If you're doing like blasting, you're trying to break apart bedrock or something. Usually you're setting this stuff off. You're setting the explosives off underneath like a series of extremely heavy blankets is the way they do it now.
Yes.
Yeah. And I guess Robert Moses
like a weighted blanket,
out.
like a boyfriend blanket.
Essentially,
Literally.
Yeah. They actually talked about in the book how there were what was the equivalent of these giant chainmail like blanket like fixtures that were like huge, and they would set off the dynamite and they would just throw them up willy-nilly in the air like they were like linen, even though they weighed tons and tons and tons.
When my girlfriend's out of town, I get a chainmail blanket to keep myself snugly.
One of the biggest parts of the Cross Bronx as it existed after it was constructed was how you had communities still on either side of it, but because it was like this large gash going across the Bronx, you had 1960s era's trucks just trying to run across it and just backfiring all the time, with like a populace that essentially always heard the highway, just blasting them with sound. And it was also, again, like I said, 1960, so unleaded gas was not gone yet.
Yeah,
or
to say the least.
Not here yet. Yeah. And, from this, the community, it devolved. It became shittier and shittier. Worse people moved into the community. There were muggings, increased assaults. The families that did live there basically got scattershotted to all corners of the city, or not.
Yeah.
Some of them were, it's impossible to tell, but there's very likely people that died from this situation because they couldn't live in stable housing anymore. And it was just all for this kind of inefficient road. It was not good at what it did, and it destroyed this community. And it was just all so this guy could never actually drive a car. That was, and that's my, excuse me, that's my denouement on the presentation as a whole. But if you think you have any any kind of thoughts on it,
muchas gracias.
I'd love to hear them.
Muchas gracias for your
denouement.
Yeah. It's really interesting to kind of just go through the specifics. I'm glad. I really like to focus just on East Tremont as a neighborhood, because it's like, it's hard to wrap your head around something as all-encompassing as like Robert Moses's career, and just really focusing in on just one neighborhood, this like working class integrated neighborhood that spawned a genius 2 generations later. Is just kind of it was helpful to kind of like look at just look at the machinations of how it worked, and it's a crazy story, man. When I used to live in Minnesota, and there was a neighborhood in St. Paul, Minnesota, called the Rondo neighborhood that had a similar fate as East Tremont. It was like black middle class neighborhood in St. Paul, kind of pretty reasonably middle class, and then they decided to build the highway to go right through that neighborhood, and that just cut through. I mean, they literally just decimated the entire neighborhood, and it just does not exist anymore. And so there's like a little now, or when I lived there, at least there was just a little like what are those streets that are just right next to the highway? Those like emergency streets or whatever. And they named one of those like Rondo Way in memoriam of this like neighborhood that was just completely decimated by this stuff. And all these, and like then all the folks, like all the black folks in that neighborhood, they lost all their wealth, and then had to, and oftentimes would go hand in hand with building these sorts of highway projects, is building projects and housing projects to go along with it, to house these people who now have lost everything. and so you're putting them in. You'll be putting them in the projects basically, and that's kind of it's just a wild story of expropriation of wealth and plunder.
Like I deliver to, you know, the projects now in Section 8 housing and what have you. And I think a lot of times people, you know, they have this very sort of like demeaning kind of attitude to, you know, housing. What I mean is that, like, if you take people and you put them in a situation where they are not able to live with dignity, it's like they're just going to get stuck. You're just going to get stuck in a situation, and you're just always going to be in that situation.
And whose fault is it that they're living without dignity in the first place? But people like Robert Moses.
And Robert Moses consulted on a lot of interstate projects in urban areas across the United States. Like he was racking in big consulting fees, like almost up until the day he died.
Yeah,
Epic.
Yeah, that was another aspect. It's like, I mean, it's so funny too, because it's just like, look, man, you're just paying this guy $60,000 so you can tell him so you can believe that it's okay to build a neighborhood through a black neighborhood, or excuse me, a highway through a black neighborhood.
Yeah.
Like,
building a neighborhood through a black neighborhood is what we do now. That's gentrification. That's a different story.
Yeah, and you know, I think it's important to notice or to recognize as well that the development of the automobile in the 20th century played into this a lot as well. You know,
right.
There's a lot of stories in the book where Robert Moses would make a redone version of the Broadway Bridge, or he made the Triborough Bridge. And what happened is the bridge would get made and it would immediately fill up to capacity. So you'd have people where it was just sort of like, okay, we just spent 6 years building this thing and it's already completely utilized in terms of the amount of cars that are on it. And I think the important distinction is that instead of seeing that and saying, okay, there needs to be multiple options here for people. You know, it's the 20th century. It's going to be really difficult for you to completely eliminate the development of the car, but you can at the very least consider public transit as one of your options. And again, it's important to note that he did not do that. He fucking hated trains, you know, all his life. And he just absolutely despised the idea of allowing poor people to get anywhere else. That wasn't there where they lived. And
climate terrorist.
Yeah.
This is a climate terrorist right here.
Basically,
yeah. So I mean, that's it. If you have any closing thoughts, you know, feel free to say them and let me know what's up.
Justin, anything you want to plug?
Well, you should listen to my podcast. Well, there's your problem. You should watch my YouTube channel. Do Not Eat 01. I think it's 01. I don't remember. There should be a new video coming out soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
Talking about mostly stealing indigenous land. It's going to be fun.
Oh, what a fun topic.
I know, right? Stealing land, stealing money, stealing people. We're going to steal all the shit. It's going to be, I don't know if fun is the right word, but
it'll be very informative.
Yes.
Nonetheless. Thank you for being a part of this. It was lovely to have you, and I'm glad you could be here.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Justin. Appreciate it.
I was glad to come on. You know, when I wasn't having my internet cut out. Yep.
Sweet. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And we will see you later, y'all.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
Bye.